Hey, Zill Brothers here. Wanted to make another video. This one based off of a quote that one of my pastor friends sent to me. And this is the quote. And it reads, "A government of the people, by the people, and for the people will never work when the people are reprobates against God," by Steve Lawson. And I just thought that quote was so good. And really what it describes is why our nation is breaking down. Now, let's just talk about the Constitution. And a lot of times people don't want to talk about the Constitution because they feel that it's a document made by men. And it is. But it is still a profound document. And the reason it's so profound is because it is based on godly principles. And when you look in the Declaration of Independence, and it says that God created men equal and gave them inalienable rights. Inalienable rights that descended from God. Now let's talk about that because that is the basis of our government. Let's think of it another way. If there is no God, then where do your rights come from? Ultimately, if there is no God, then your rights come from whatever man thinks your rights should be. And so you could say that government grants you your rights. And if government grants you your rights, government could take away your rights. So your rights are at the convenience of the government. And ultimately, when you look at all forms of atheism, what they do is they support a system of dictatorship because there is no such thing as an inalienable rights because there is no power higher than a government, right? There is nothing that can force a government to do something except another government that's stronger than it. And so there is no right of the individual that is inalienable. Every right is negotiable. And that's an important truth that needs to be recognized. Now, where does an inalienable right come from? An alienable right comes from this biblical truth that governments are lent their power by God. And so think of it in this sense. When God created man, he gave man freedom and he gave men certain rights. He gave them. And then he allowed governments to exist, but he didn't give governments the power to have authority more than he gave men, right? So ultimately he said to a man, hey, these are your rights. And then if he got a government, he'd say, okay, you can govern over men. You can establish and enforce my rules, but you can't go past that, right? So if I say man is free, a government can then not declare that man is not free. And that will be wrong. And that's where we get an immoral government. If you're an atheist, you really can't believe in an immoral government because really you don't have any basis for your morality anyway. But ultimately, you can't believe in an immoral government because a government is the highest authority and morality descends from the highest authority. Whereas when you believe in a God that is rational, right, then you believe that those rights came from him, descended straight from him, and therefore you could have inalienable rights. Therefore, if you have rights that exist before government is established, then if a government goes against those rights, that government is itself immoral. And that's where the Constitution came from. That's why the Bill of Rights is there. If you look at the Bill of Rights, what they essentially try to do is they try to establish the fact that no matter what, a government does not have rights that go past these limits. And if they do, they're immoral. And what we have nowadays is we have now transcended that, right? We have now gone to the point where we are trying to go to a post-Christian society where we're saying to ourselves, all rights are negotiable. All truths are negotiable. Ultimately, all ideas are not necessarily free. Men are not free to think what they want, right? Men cannot proclaim what they believe to be true. No, they have to proclaim what we believe is safe. And safe is dangerous because who decides what safe is? Ultimately, safety is simply in agreeing with the people who are in power. And who are in power? Now, here's the thing. Back in the day, people used to have to be afraid of their rights being trampled by a government. And I still think we do need to fear that. But I think more than that, we have to fear our rights being trampled by powerful organizations that could have more power than a government had back then. Because back then, a government only had as much power as within the eyes of the king himself, right? So if a king ruled over, let's just say he ruled over the city of Chicago, he wouldn't necessarily be able to tell what you were doing in Aurora. And so his rule or his dominance might be brutal in the city of Chicago, but down in Aurora, it will be lessened. And if you go further and further and further, and then you got all the way to Iowa, it will feel like you were free because he really couldn't establish his rule that far because technology wasn't able to transmit his orders as quickly. He wasn't able to see if they were fulfilled as efficiently. And so he could only rule as viciously as he could in his own palace and in his own city. And even there, his rule wasn't complete because he didn't have cameras everywhere, right? He could only rule as far as the people who were under him were efficient in carrying out his orders. Well, nowadays, we have technology, right? And so ultimately, when you look at something like Facebook or something like Google, they have the power to be way more oppressive than any government ever could because they see every inquiry you make. They see every comment you make. They know what you like. They know what you think. They're studying all your data. They have all your data. And so ultimately, they have the ability to cut off your ability to proclaim what you believe to true, or even if you don't believe it to be true, if just to simply they can cut off your speech, right? They can limit that. And so ultimately, when you have people like that who don't believe in God, right? They really don't believe that you have a right to anything. You don't have inalienable rights. You have negotiable rights. And if you have negotiable rights, those rights can be ended when they see fit. So anyways, I just wanted to point that out. A government that tries to rule over a people, or any organization that tries to rule over a people and tries to rule without God, will eventually descend into a dictatorship. And this is indisputable logic. So hey, if you want to argue with me, post a comment below and maybe I'll respond to it in another video. Thank you.